My name is Evelyn Parker, and I am 59 years old. On the night of my son's wedding in Savannah, Georgia, I believed I was about to live through one of the proudest moments of my life. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, their light bouncing off the polished floor like scattered stars. Guests leaned in close over candlelit tables, the air heavy with the scent of roses and champagne. A jazz trio played near the corner, the soft notes rising and falling like a tide against the buzz of conversation. I sat at the head table, my navy gown smoothed neatly over my lap, my heart swelling as I watched my son Daniel laugh with his new wife. For months I had poured myself into every detail of this day, choosing the flowers, tasting the menu, folding programs, late into the night. It was meant to be a celebration of love, of continuity, of everything Michael and I had built together for over 3 decades. Michael, my husband of 35 years, stood suddenly beside me. He lifted his glass, and the room quieted with the ease of a well-rehearsed cue. I expected him to toast our son's future, to honor the moment as a father and a husband. Instead, his voice cut clean through the silence, smooth but sharp enough to draw blood. "This is the end for us, Evelyn. I found someone new." The words fell heavy, echoing off the walls until the music faltered and died. Forks slipped from hands striking plates. Conversation stopped mid-breath. Across from me sat Clara, his assistant, dressed in crimson, her fingers circling the stem of her glass as her lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. I could feel every gaze land on me, expecting a collapse, a scream, a flood of tears. My chest tightened, but I inhaled slowly and lifted my chin. Michael thought he had stripped me bare in front of the world. He believed I had no choice but to break. What he did not know, what no one in that room yet understood, was that the script he thought he controlled had already been rewritten. I rose from my chair, smoothing the fabric of my gown with deliberate calm. Every movement felt amplified under the chandeliers, every breath measured against the hush of hundreds of guests. Instead of shrinking under the weight of Michael's words, I let a slow smile form on my lips. It wasn't the smile of a woman broken. It was the smile of someone who had waited for this stage, for this exact performance he thought belonged to him alone. "Thank you, Michael," I said, my voice carrying clear and steady across the room. "Thank you for announcing this here in front of family, friends, and colleagues. You've just given me the greatest gift witnesses." The ripple that spread through the ballroom was instant gasps mixing with sharp whispers. Michael's confident grin faltered. His hand gripped the back of his chair as though the ground beneath him had shifted. Clara's smirk slipped her glass, trembling slightly between her fingers. I lifted my champagne flute, my gaze sweeping across the room. "What you didn't know," I continued, "is that this marriage had already ended. I filed for divorce at 9 o'clock this morning, and as of now, every joint account we ever shared is frozen by court order." The ballroom erupted in disbelief. Guests leaned toward one another, voices buzzing their shock, a living thing. Michael stammered, trying to form words, but nothing came. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a crisp white envelope. I laid it gently beside his plate. "Inside are copies of the filings and evidence of everything you thought I would never discover." I let my hand linger for a moment, then released it like a final farewell. Around me, the silence swelled again, and I could almost hear the unraveling of Michael's carefully staged humiliation. He believed he had trapped me, but in that instant, it was clear who had fallen into whose snare. 6 months before that wedding night, the first crack appeared when I opened a bank statement at the kitchen counter. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock above the stove, its hands dragging through the late evening. A small withdrawal caught my eye midnight on a Tuesday for an amount just low enough to avoid suspicion. Michael had been asleep beside me at that hour, or at least that was what I believed. I told myself it must be a mistake, maybe an automatic draft I'd forgotten about. But once you notice a single flaw, your eyes begin to search for more. The next month, there it was again. A new withdrawal, different amount, different time, and then another. By the third statement, my stomach carried a cold, steady weight. My pen circled numbers until the page looked scarred, each loop around the figures like a knot tightening inside me. I didn't mention it to him. I couldn't. Words felt too fragile, too easy for him to bend into excuses. The weeks that followed offered more than numbers. A hotel bill charged to his corporate card tucked neatly into a drawer as if I wouldn't find it. A jewelry receipt slipped between magazines on his desk. The name on a weekend reservation, Clara. She had sat at my dinner table passing dishes with a polite smile, pretending to be nothing more than his assistant. I remember staring at the black letters on the page until they blurred my hands trembling, but my focus sharpening. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, and instead of sleeping, I sat under the kitchen light with the receipt spread before me. The betrayal was no longer suspicion, it was fact. I realized then that silence would be my cover and patience my weapon. But patience alone wouldn't be enough. If Michael wanted a secret life, I would build a secret plan of my own. From that night forward, I learned to live in two worlds. By day, I wore the mask of the loyal wife. I kissed Michael's cheek when he came home late, laughed lightly when he muttered flimsy excuses about business dinners, and stood beside him at social events as though nothing had changed. But by night, when his breathing grew heavy with sleep, I slipped from our bedroom and into the study. The lamp on his desk cast a harsh yellow glow across the papers I spread before me. My fingers traced each receipt, each transfer, each hotel confirmation. I highlighted numbers, printed duplicates, and tucked them into a leather binder I bought in secret. The binder grew thick, its spine heavy with evidence. Every new page was like a brick in the wall I was building against him. I hated the shaking of my own hands the way my heart pounded when I heard the floorboards creak. But beneath the fear ran something stronger, a resolve I had never known. If Michael had chosen betrayal, then I would choose strategy. It was during this time that I turned to Thomas Bennett, my brother-in-law. Thomas had retired from the bench years ago, but the sharpness in his eyes had never dulled. One evening I brought the binder to his study, the shelves lined with books that smelled of dust and history. I spread the papers across his desk, my voice low and steady as I explained everything I had found. He listened without interruption, his brow furrowed, his hands folded. When I finished, he leaned back and said almost gently, "Michael has underestimated you, Evelyn. That may be his undoing." With his guidance, the plan began to take shape. Divorce papers, emergency orders, financial freezes. My silence had shielded me long enough. Now it would become the trap he never saw coming. The morning of Daniel's wedding dawned clear and warm sunlight spilling through the curtains as if to mock the storm brewing beneath my skin. I rose early, long before the house stirred, and sat at the kitchen table with a pen poised over the final stack of documents. My hand was steady as I signed my name again and again. With each signature, another thread binding me to Michael snapped clean. By 9 o'clock, the filings were complete. The court clerk stamped the divorce petition, the emergency order, to freeze our accounts sealed with authority. In the eyes of the law, my future no longer belonged to him. I walked out of that courthouse with my head held high, the folder pressed against my chest like armor. Back home, I dressed for the wedding with deliberate care. The navy gown hung smooth against me, pearls at my neck, my hair pinned in place. I looked into the mirror and whispered to my reflection, "Tonight is not his victory. Tonight is mine." At the ballroom, everything glimmered with the weight of celebration. Guests swirled across the floor, glasses clinked, laughter rippled. Michael worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, smiling wide. He looked at me now and then with a confidence that made my stomach tighten, but not from fear, from certainty. He believed he would take the stage that evening, strip me of dignity, and step neatly into a new life with Clara at his side. I let him. I let him revel in his illusion, watching him toast with colleagues, whisper into Clara's ear, bask in the glow of his imagined triumph. For hours I played the part of the gracious wife, the doting mother of the groom. No one knew that the trap had already been set, the ink already dry. When the chandeliers brightened for the dinner speeches and Michael rose with his glass, I knew the moment had come. He thought he was about to humiliate me. He never understood that the only script left was mine. That night, long after the chandeliers dimmed and the last guest drifted away, Michael pushed open the front door of our house. I wasn't there to greet him. Instead, 2 suitcases stood by the entryway, zipped tight, as if the walls themselves had expelled him. He called my name sharp and impatient, his footsteps heavy across the hardwood. What he found instead was Daniel still in his tuxedo, his tie loosened, his face streaked with tears that had dried into pale lines. My son stood in the middle of the living room, shoulders squared, his voice low but unshakable. "How could you do this, Dad? On my wedding night to Mom." Michael's bravado cracked. He muttered something about love being complicated, about me never understanding him, but Daniel cut through the excuses. His fists clenched at his sides as he demanded answers. For the first time in his life, he spoke to his father not as a boy, but as a man unwilling to let betrayal go unchallenged. From the hallway, Thomas emerged, calm, deliberate, a folder in his hand. He had been waiting. "Michael," he said evenly, "the evidence is overwhelming. The accounts, the receipts, the contract you forced Evelyn to sign years ago, it will all be used in court." Michael sputtered, his face paling. Then Clara appeared behind him, her heels clicking nervously on the floor. Daniel turned his fury toward her. "Did you know the gifts he bought you came from our family's savings, from the money meant for us?" Her eyes darted toward Michael, searching for support, but he had none left to give. The silence between them told her everything. Without a word, Clara turned and left the door, slamming softly behind her. Michael stood alone in the center of the room, abandoned by both his son and his lover. For the first time, I think he realized the scale of the battlefield he had stepped onto, and the war was only beginning. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnished wood and old paper, the kind of air that carried the weight of judgment. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my binder of evidence neatly stacked before me, Thomas steady at my side. Across the aisle, Michael leaned toward his attorney, his face pale and damp, the confidence he once carried now reduced to nervous whispers. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and little patience for theatrics, called the room to order. Michael's lawyer began with practiced bravado, arguing that the marriage contract we had signed decades ago was outdated, irrelevant in a modern world. He painted Michael as a man simply seeking happiness, claiming fidelity clauses belonged to another time. My attorney rose with quiet assurance. Page by page, she laid out the truth. The contract was binding, and Michael himself had insisted on it years earlier when he believed it would protect him. The clause on fidelity was crystal clear, enforceable, for the duration of the marriage. Then came the documents, the bank withdrawals, the hotel invoices, the jewelry receipts, each one projected onto the screen with undeniable clarity. Every line was a strike against him, every signature his own. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening as the judge examined each exhibit. When she finally spoke, her tone was cool and decisive. The contract stands. Fidelity was required. Financial honesty was non-negotiable. Mr. Parker, you broke both. The gavel struck once, echoing like thunder. With that sound, the scales tipped. The house remained in my name. The retirement funds transferred to my side. Control of investments tilted decisively toward me. Michael's illusions of power collapsed in that single moment, his eyes fixed on the table as if he could hide from the ruin. I didn't smile. Justice didn't call for celebration. It called for clarity, and clarity was finally mine. In the weeks after the ruling, Michael's world unraveled with a cruel precision. The man who once commanded attention at charity galas and business dinners found himself shut out of every circle he had built. Invitations stopped arriving, phone calls went unanswered. Partners who had once raised their glasses with him now distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Clara lasted only a little longer. At first she clung to him, whispering promises that they could start fresh. But when the accounts were revealed to be frozen, when she realized the jewelry and vacations had been paid with dwindling funds rather than wealth, secure her devotion withered. I heard she packed her things quietly, moving out of the apartment he had rented for her. By the time the news reached me, she was already gone. Michael drifted into obscurity. He rented a one-bedroom apartment near the highway, far from the manicured neighborhoods he once called home. I imagined him carrying plastic grocery bags up narrow stairs, his suit jacket wrinkled, his silver hair no longer polished to perfection. Neighbors passed him without recognition, without care. The man who once relished the spotlight had become a ghost, invisible in his own city. I never saw him during that time, though. Whispers reached me through mutual acquaintances. They said he looked older, thinner, like a man shrunken by his own mistakes. They said his laughter, once booming across ballrooms, had vanished into silence. And perhaps that was the greatest irony. Michael had tried to use silence as a weapon against me, believing my quiet compliance would protect him. Now silence was his only companion, and it was merciless. As for me, I did not gloat. I did not need to. His downfall carried its own weight, heavy and undeniable. Justice had been served not with fire and spectacle, but with the slow erosion of everything he once held dear. Spring came to Savannah with the scent of jasmine drifting through the streets, and for the first time in decades, I woke with a purpose that belonged solely to me. I had signed a lease on a narrow storefront downtown, its wide glass windows letting in streams of morning light. To anyone else, it was an empty space with cracked tile floors and faded paint. To me, it was a blank canvas. I spent weeks scrubbing painting sanding counters smooth until my hands ached. Neighbors stopped by curious, asking what I planned to do. I told them simply, a bakery. It was a dream I had once tucked away when Michael dismissed it as frivolous when raising Daniel and keeping a household running left no room for more. But now, the dream breathed again. On the first week, I rose before dawn, mixing dough with flour that coated my apron, the smell of cinnamon and sugar filling the air. By noon, trays of rolls, lemon tarts, and golden loaves lined the counter. When I opened the door, the scent drifted out onto the street and strangers wandered in. A student bought a slice of pie on her way to class. An older woman said the bread reminded her of childhood. By the second week, workers lined up during their lunch breaks, children pressed their noses to the glass, and families stopped after church. The shop buzzed with warmth. Laughter and conversation rose above the clinking of plates, and I stood behind the counter watching life gather in a space I had built with my own hands. Above the main table, I hung a drawing from my granddaughter. Though simple, it captured something profound. A woman sat alone at a table with a small cake, before her light glowing from her face. Once I saw loneliness in that sketch. Now I saw strength. This bakery wasn't just a business. It was proof that life after betrayal could be sweeter than anything I had left behind. One Saturday afternoon, the bell above the bakery door jingled, and Daniel walked in with his new wife. They looked younger than their years, hand in hand, laughter chasing the shadows that had once clouded their wedding day. He kissed my cheek and told me how proud he was. His wife settled at the long wooden table, and I placed slices of warm peach cobbler in front of them. For the first time in months, I saw Daniel's shoulders relax, his smile unguarded. Not long after Thomas arrived, leaning on his cane, his eyes soft with satisfaction. He had been my anchor through the storm, the one who reminded me that patience and preparation could carve a path to freedom. He sat down beside us, and the four of us shared that afternoon like a family restored. Laughter mingled with the golden light streaming through the windows, wrapping the room in a peace I had once thought unreachable. The drawing above the table caught my eye again, the woman alone with her cake, her face lit from within. I used to see it as a portrait of solitude, a reminder of all I had lost. But in that moment, surrounded by my son, his wife, and Thomas, I saw it differently. It wasn't loneliness at all. It was radiance, the quiet glow of someone who had discovered that being whole didn't depend on another person's presence. Daniel lifted his fork and grinned. "Mom," he said, "this place feels alive. It feels like you." His words sank deep, sweeter than any pastry I could bake. For years, my identity had been tied to a man who betrayed me. Now here, my son saw me for who I truly was, someone capable of building, of creating, of shining on her own. And in that recognition, I felt something settle inside me, not just survival, but triumph. As the weeks rolled on, the bakery settled into a rhythm that felt like breathing. Mornings began with the hiss of the oven and the scent of rising dough. Afternoons drifted by in a haze of sugar and conversation, and evenings ended with the quiet ritual of wiping counters clean and locking the door. The life I had once imagined, simple, purposeful, filled with warmth, was no longer a dream deferred. It was mine. One evening, as the sun sank low over Savannah, the glass panes of the bakery caught the last light and turned it into sheets of fire. I stood at the doorway, apron dusted with flour, and watched the glow stretch across the empty tables. My reflection in the window looked older, yes, but also steadier, stronger. I thought of Michael then, not with bitterness, but with a clarity that surprised me. He had gambled everything on arrogance, convinced that my silence meant weakness. He had tried to humiliate me in front of hundreds, never realizing he was the one stepping into a trap. Now he lived in a small apartment, a ghost of the man he had been while I stood in the light of my own making. His choices had carried him out of my world, and I had no intention of ever letting him back in. I whispered the truth aloud, not for anyone else, but for myself. I don't live in the dark anymore. My table was full without him, full of laughter, of family, of neighbors who had become friends. My voice was steady, no longer trembling behind silence. For decades I had measured my worth by someone else's approval. That time was over. Now when I look at the sketch above the main table, I no longer see a lonely woman. I see a woman radiant, illuminated from within, sitting at her own table with dignity and peace. This is my life now, sweeter, brighter, freer than anything I left behind. And for the first time in 35 years, I know without hesitation, the light I stand in is entirely my own. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.